I mean, this was an absolute shellacking blowout. I don't know what you want to call it. What do you think it means?
Well, it means that Donald Trump is clearly in charge of the modern Republican Party, and he gets whatever he wants whenever he wants it in the primary. Now, the problem is that we're about to go into a general election season, and he continues to want to nominate the worst candidates. You talked about this earlier. They are spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to prop up Trump's slate of deluded Republicans here. And the question is, in the general, they will need every single dollar they can get their hands on. You know, and Jen, you talked about the turnout, and I think it's really interesting. In the elections, we've seen over 100 elections since Trump came in office. Democrats are overperforming by about 10 points. But when you look at why, it is because Republicans are not turning out in massive numbers. Their people aren't angry, as Chuck was saying. They're getting kind of everything they want. And that's with normal Republicans. You put a guy like Ken Paxton at the top of the ticket, it's not that suddenly a bunch of Republicans may vote Democratic. Maybe that happens, but probably what happens is that a whole bunch of people just don't vote. And we'll take it whatever we can get it. Because when you try to get to 50%, you'll take it any way you can get it.
That's true. You just need more votes than the other person. That's how elections work. Chuck, there's this broad perception. You sort of hear this. I feel like friends of mine will say this to me who are paying attention to this, that Ken Paxton was an easier Democrat for James Tallarico to beat. Is that true in your view?
Our polling showed that we could have beat either one of them. I think it's the difference, to Jim's point, of the electorate in the general election, and that's what I want to talk about. You said, how does he win? Well, there's a couple things going on in Texas that's really different than what we've seen in the last few of the election cycles. One is you saw this dramatic move to the right over the last few cycles with Latino voters that I know very well. Well, what we've seen in the primary was them dramatically moving back because guess what? They don't like their aunts and uncles picked up by ICE. They don't like the gas is $4 a gallon. So if Latinos are moving back, Jim said the electorate was moving back 10 points, which is right. But Latino voters in Texas have been moving back over 20 points. And if that stays true for the general election and you couple a bunch of just a few disenfranchised Cornyn voters, that's the recipe for Texas to truly turn blue.
Yeah, the polling has showed that. Okay, I want to talk about that more. But I want to go back to Jim just for a moment, because one of the things we all know from working on campaigns is you got to be clear-eyed, too, about your opponent and their capabilities, as much as they may seem crazy. And Ken Paxton is perhaps the most corrupt person on the ballot this year. I think he safely is. But what do you think? He is connected clearly with the Republican base in Texas, especially with Trump voters. He has Trump's endorsement. This seat, again, could swing control of the Senate. What do you think? This is excitement. Everybody's looking at him and they think, wow, he's crazy. But what do Democrats have to be clear-eyed about here?
That it's not about them. It's not about Ken Paxton. It's about these voters in Texas and their lives and their hopes and their dreams. You got to have a proactive message that excites people, that says you get it and that you're going to make their lives better. People are struggling out there and they don't want to hear a bunch of negative attack ads. They want very clear ideas on how to make gas prices cheaper, grocery prices cheaper, and get along. And I think the problem Democrats got into, Jen, and you and I have talked about this a bunch, is we just thought we could hammer Donald Trump for 3 election cycles. We thought it was just enough to kind of demagogue him. And that's just not where people are. Ken Paxton has won several statewide elections in Texas, and they weren't close. So this whole theory the Democrats are saying, oh, my God, we're definitely going to win because Paxton's on the ballot. I don't think that's true. I think we're going to have to win a very tough election in a state we haven't won since my senior year in college. So let's be very clear on how hard this is. Jen, sadly, I'm now a member of the AARP.
Oh, that's all right. You're owning it. I like to hear it. Okay, Chuck, I've had James Tallarico on several times, and he does not sound like a traditional politician. He is certainly not somebody who spends all of his time attacking his opponent, and he'll have to do that, of course, to some degree here, as he has done. But what is the strategy here, to Jim's point, in terms of the balance between you have this deeply flawed candidate who you're running against, there's going to be a lot of pressure for him to go absolutely nuclear on Ken Paxton, and also at the same time talk about continue to introduce himself to voters in Texas and tell them what he's going to do in the Senate. What should people expect about what that balance is for him?
Look, when you have a winning system, you don't break that system. And James Tallarico was never, quote unquote, supposed to win the primary against the most popular Democratic politician, arguably, in the state of Texas. And what he talked about, which is really smart, and what we haven't seen in Texas is a long time, which is about bringing everybody together. If you're a Republican, you're welcome over here. If you're a lefty Democrat, you're welcome over here. If you're in the middle, you're welcome over here. However you identify yourself, this campaign is about welcoming you in, and not about left versus right, but top versus bottom. That's where the anxiety is. And I think that's why a uniquely qualified candidate like Tallarico, who's looking for things that bring us together and not the things that tear us apart, which is really different. Me and Jim's run a lot of campaigns. A lot of people have talked about doing that, but they just scorch earth like everybody else. Tallarico shows up and starts quoting the Bible. When's the last time you saw a Democrat do that just as a starting point? That's what makes him very different. He's super connected to the community and all communities, and he's going to be at all the places all the time. That's what's going to make this really different.
Jim, let's take a big picture here for a moment, because I think and we've talked about this before, but a couple of months ago, I think most of us wouldn't have said that Democrats could win the Senate back, if we were being totally honest. It feels very viable here. I can't believe the amount of money that was spent. I mean, $128 million on this race on the Republican side. Talk about the impact of that, both when you're talking to donors who may not want to spend more money, when there are other races it could have been spent on, but it should be spent on. What's the impact of that? And how do you see kind of the likelihood at this point of Democrats winning back the Senate?
Boy, you're exactly right, Jen. 6 months ago, people just said the Senate looked too far, and it was important to stay very focused. I heard this a million times. Let's just go win the House. We have to stop Trump. Let's just go win the House. And the truth is, the Senate made their own luck. They got great opposition research. They got Joni Ernst out of the race in Iowa. Maine has obviously continued to evolve. There is now, you look at the seats and you can have a really clear pathway to 50 and 51. And that's before you get to Texas. If you start putting Texas in play, Ohio, and you know more about Ohio than either two of us. So Jen can give us a little Ohio lecture at the end of this, why that's doable. Alaska's doable. I mean, the truth is you want as many shots on goal as you can get. And we now have a bunch of different shots on goal, which makes us start to think, wow, the Senate's really in place. And so if that's true and you're the Republicans, you just can't spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to prop up some of these candidates. You can't fix it. You can't have Ken Paxton and spend all this money trying to keep him from winning the primary. You can't go after Massey, who's a really big right winger in Kentucky. You're spending money you're desperately going to need in a bunch of these races. And you're doing it just because one guy sits on his Truth Social at 6 o'clock in the morning and tweeting for the 400th time that day and decides to change the politics of his party. They are now captive of the crazy, and the crazy is the president of the United States.
Don't forget the $13 million spent on legislative races in Indiana, Jim. That was a good use of money on that side. Chuck, I have to ask you, after the 2024 election, and I'm sure you got so many calls, you talked about this a lot, I know, there was this feeling like Trump had a hold on the Latino vote across the country. It's never going to be won back. He won 55% of the Latino vote in Texas, which you know well, but for viewers out there. But in a recent poll, and you alluded to this, and this was one conducted by Texas Southern University, likely Latino voters actually prefer Tallarico over both Cornyn and Paxton, more importantly, by 4 points and 8 points for Paxton. Why do you think this how do you explain that? And how do you build on that? And what lessons can be learned for other states?
The Latino vote across the country is one of the youngest demographics. Let's start there. We're multi-generational households, multilingual. We talk many different languages, Spanish and English, and sometimes all at the same time. But what really makes us different is this fluidity of the vote, because we haven't been here, quote, literally long enough to be stalwart Democrats or to be stalwart Republicans. So when you have a candidate like Donald Trump who's outside of the system at a time when there's a lot of economic anxiety, you have a portion of that electorate, mainly Latino men, who are willing to give that a shot. But now gas hasn't come down. The price of things haven't come down. And then on top of that, you're locking up grandmothers and putting them in ICE facilities. And that's a line too far. So it's the perfect storm to get these folks back. Now, Democrats, the job's not done. You have to do what James Tallarico's done, which is show up in those communities and talk about your philosophies and what you're going to do. And James Tallarico has a deep tie to the Latino community, teaching school in San Antonio, being born and raised down in the Valley. When he shows up in these communities, he knows how to speak to these communities with authentic messaging that they understand. That's the perfect storm of why Texas could turn blue, because Latinos are going to overperform, and he's going to show up in places that most Democrats are scared to go to.